The cantina on Kepler Station buzzed with the usual mixture of alien dialects and universal translator static. Commander Zethkar of the Valerian High Fleet nursed his third drink of the evening, his scaled fingers drumming against the worn metal table. Around him, officers from a dozen different species shared war stories and complained about the ongoing conflict with the human settlements. "Another sector lost," muttered Captain Vexhai, her insectoid mandibles clicking in frustration. The humans took the Centauri belt without firing a single shot. How do they keep doing this? Zethkar's orange eyes narrowed. Intelligence reports suggest they have a new operative. Someone who's been hitting our supply lines, disrupting communications, turning our allies against us. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. They call her Ghost. The table fell silent. Even the Thurian diplomat, notorious for his constant chatter, stopped mid-sentence. Ghost had become something of a legend in the past 6 months. A human operative who could infiltrate any facility, disable any defense system, and disappear before anyone knew she'd been there. "Impossible," scoffed General Mordak, his forearms gesturing dismissively. "No single individual could cause that much damage. The humans are spreading propaganda to make us afraid of shadows." But Zethkar had seen the security footage from the Arcturus mining station. Or rather, he had seen what the cameras couldn't capture. Doors opening by themselves, guards falling unconscious one by one, critical systems failing in perfect sequence. The only evidence of human presence was a small device left behind, containing stolen data that had compromised 3 more facilities within the week. Across the galaxy, on the human colony ship New Horizon, Lieutenant Sarah Chun sat in her quarters, staring at her reflection in the darkened viewport. To anyone who might glance her way, she appeared to be just another mid-level officer reviewing duty rosters on her tablet. Average height, brown hair pulled back in regulation style. Unremarkable features that seemed to blend into any crowd. But Sarah Chun didn't exist. The woman looking back from the glass was Captain Elena Vasquez, though that name appeared on no official records anymore. 3 years ago, she had volunteered for Project Phantom, an experimental program that combined advanced stealth technology with psychological conditioning. The result was an operative who could become functionally invisible, not through any exotic technology, but through a combination of neural implants that altered perception and training that made her presence so unremarkable that most sentient beings simply didn't register her existence. She touched the small device behind her left ear, feeling the subtle vibration that meant her neural dampener was active. The implant worked by suppressing the bioelectric field that most intelligent species use subconsciously to detect other living beings. Combined with specific movement patterns, voice modulation, and psychological techniques, it made her effectively transparent in plain sight. Her tablet chimed softly with an incoming message from command. Another mission. Another impossible target that conventional forces couldn't touch. The Valerian fortress world of Kethmore had fallen under human protection after its population voted to defect from the Empire. But the Valerian military wasn't accepting the loss gracefully. Intelligence suggested they were planning to deploy a biological weapon that would kill the planet's civilian population while leaving the infrastructure intact. The weapon was stored in a facility that existed in a pocket dimension, accessible only through a heavily guarded portal on the fortress moon of Quetzalcoatlus. Elena read the mission parameters twice. Even for her, this would be challenging. The Valorians had learned from previous infiltrations and implemented new security measures specifically designed to counter stealth technology. Heat sensors, motion detectors, even psionic barriers that could theoretically detect her neural implant. She closed the tablet and began preparing her equipment. The neural dampener was just one part of her arsenal. Her combat suit was woven with metamaterial fibers that could bend light around her body, though only for short periods before the power cells depleted. Her sidearm fired specialized rounds that disrupted alien nervous systems without causing permanent damage. She had made it a point never to kill unless absolutely necessary. But her most important tool was something no technology could replicate: her understanding of alien psychology. 3 years of deep cover missions had taught her how different species process information, what they noticed, and what they ignored. Valorians, for instance, had excellent peripheral vision, but poor depth perception. They relied heavily on scent markers to identify individuals, but their olfactory sensors could be confused by the right combination of pheromone blockers. 2 days later, Elena stood in the cargo bay of the transport ship Meridian's Edge, watching Keth Secundus grow larger in the viewport. The moon's surface was scarred with defensive installations, each one bristling with weapons that could reduce a battleship to scrap metal. But none of them were designed to stop a single person who didn't officially exist. The transport captain, a gruff human named Torres, barely glanced at her as she checked her equipment one final time. As far as he knew, she was just another intelligence analyst heading to the diplomatic station on the moon's far side. The neural dampener ensured he wouldn't remember her face clearly, and her false credentials would check out under all but the most intensive scrutiny. Approaching Docking Bay 7, Torres announced over the intercom. Standard customs inspection on arrival. Keep your documentation ready. Elena smiled slightly. She had been through Valerian customs dozens of times on this moon and others. They would scan her identification, run her through their security protocols, and wave her through without a second thought. The psychological conditioning that made her forgettable was perhaps the most valuable asset in her arsenal. The docking procedure took 20 minutes. Elena disembarked with the other passengers, a mix of diplomats, traders, and technicians who worked on the moon's various facilities. The Valerian customs officer was thorough, but routine, his scaled hands moving efficiently through the scanner controls as each passenger stepped forward. When Elena's turn came, she presented her credentials with just the right amount of nervous respect. The officer's orange eyes flicked over her face briefly before returning to his scanner. The device hummed for several seconds, analyzing her biometrics against the false identity she had constructed. Purpose of visit? The officer asked in accented standard. Agricultural assessment, Elena replied, her voice carrying the slightly bored tone of someone who had made this trip many times before. The colony worlds are having soil contamination issues. Need to check the mineral exports from the mining stations. The officer nodded and stamped her documentation. Just another routine visit by another forgettable human bureaucrat. Elena retrieved her papers and moved toward the exit, already planning her route to the dimensional portal facility. But as she reached the customs barrier, something made her pause. A subtle shift in the air currents, a barely perceptible change in the background electromagnetic field. Someone was watching her with more attention than her conditioning should have allowed. Without turning around, she activated her suit's passive sensors and confirmed her suspicion. A Valerian intelligence officer stood near the observation deck, his attention focused directly on her. Not on the general area where she stood, but specifically on her. Somehow, he was seeing through her camouflage. Elena forced herself to maintain her unremarkable pace as she exited the customs area. This was a new development and potentially a dangerous one. If the Valorians had found a way to counter her abilities, every mission would become exponentially more difficult. She needed to reach the dimensional portal facility before word of her presence could spread. But first, she had to lose her tail without revealing that she knew she was being followed. The moon's civilian sector was a maze of corridors and transit tubes connecting various commercial and residential areas. Elena took a deliberately inefficient route toward her supposed destination, stopping at information kiosks and consulting her tablet as if uncertain of her directions. Behind her, she could sense the intelligence officer maintaining his distance, but never losing track of her position. After 30 minutes of seemingly aimless wandering, Elena ducked into a public restroom and activated her suit's full stealth mode. The metamaterial fibers bent light around her body, rendering her effectively invisible for the next 10 minutes before the power cells would need to recharge. She slipped out through a maintenance access and doubled back toward the facility where her tail had last seen her. The Valerian officer was still there, scanning the area with obvious confusion. Elena watched from an alcove as he spoke into his communication device, probably reporting that his target had simply vanished. She smiled grimly. Let them think their detection method was flawed. But the smile faded as she noticed something else. The officer wasn't alone. 3 more Valorians in civilian clothing had positioned themselves at strategic points around the area, and they were all carrying scanning devices she didn't recognize. This wasn't a routine surveillance operation. They had been specifically prepared to track someone with her capabilities. Elena retreated deeper into the maintenance tunnels, her mind racing through the implications. Either her cover had been blown before she arrived, or the Valorians had developed new technology specifically designed to counter human stealth operatives. Either possibility meant the mission had just become much more complicated. The dimensional portal facility was located in the moon's military sector, behind 3 layers of security that would challenge even conventional infiltration techniques. Elena had originally planned to walk through the front door using a false maintenance order, but that option was no longer viable if they were actively hunting for her. She pulled up the facility schematics on her tablet, studying the ventilation systems and power conduits that might provide alternative access routes. The portal itself was housed in a reinforced chamber designed to contain dimensional distortions, with walls made from exotic matter that could theoretically withstand a nuclear explosion. But every facility had weaknesses, and Elena had learned to find them. The portal required massive amounts of power to maintain the dimensional bridge, power that came from a fusion reactor housed in a separate building. If she could disrupt the power supply at precisely the right moment, the portal would collapse and strand anyone on the other side. The plan was risky, but it would accomplish the mission objective without requiring direct access to the biological weapon. If the Valerian strike team was trapped in the pocket dimension when their escape route collapsed, they couldn't deploy their weapon against Keth Moore's civilian population. Elena made her way through the maintenance tunnels toward the power facility, her stealth suit recharging as she moved. The tunnels were poorly monitored, designed to be accessed only by automated maintenance drones. But they also provided the perfect route for someone who didn't officially exist. As she neared her target, Elena allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The Valorians might have detected her presence, but they still had no idea what she was planning. In a few hours, their biological weapon would be permanently out of reach, and another human colony would be safe from genocidal retaliation. She had no way of knowing that her every move was being tracked by sensors far more sophisticated than anything the Valorians possessed, or that her mission was about to collide with a conspiracy that reached far beyond the current war. The power facility's interior hummed with the barely contained energy of the fusion reactor that kept the dimensional portal stable. Elena crouched in a maintenance shaft above the main control room, watching the Valerian technicians through the grating below. 3 engineers monitored the reactor's output, while automated systems managed the complex equations required to maintain a stable bridge between dimensions. Her tablet displayed the facility's power grid in real time, showing the precise flow of energy from the reactor to the portal. Elena had spent weeks studying similar installations, learning to identify the critical points where a carefully placed disruption could cascade through the entire system. She needed to wait for the exact moment when the portal was cycling through its maintenance sequence, when the dimensional bridge was at its most vulnerable. That moment would come in 18 minutes. Elena activated her neural dampener to full power and dropped silently into the control room. The 3 technicians continued their work, their attention focused on the displays showing reactor output and dimensional stability readings. Her presence barely registered as a shadow in their peripheral vision, easily dismissed as a trick of the overhead lighting. She moved carefully between the control stations, placing small devices at key points in the power distribution network. Each device was no larger than a coin, designed to overload specific circuits when activated remotely. The beauty of the system was its subtlety. The overloads would appear to be random equipment failures rather than sabotage. Dimensional variance holding steady, one of the technicians reported to his colleague. Portal cycle will complete in 15 minutes. Elena smiled grimly as she attached the final device to the primary power coupling. In 15 minutes, the portal would indeed complete its cycle permanently. But as she prepared to retreat to the maintenance shaft, her enhanced hearing caught something that made her freeze. Footsteps in the corridor outside, moving with military precision. More concerning was the electronic signature her suit detected, multiple scanning devices of a type she had never encountered before. The control room door slid open to reveal 6 figures in powered armor, their weapons trained on positions throughout the room. But these weren't Valorians. The armor design was sleek and advanced, bearing no insignia she recognized. The soldiers' faces were hidden behind reflective visors, but their movements suggested they were human. "Maintain position," the lead figure commanded, his voice artificially modulated. "Target is confirmed present in this area." Elena's blood ran cold. These soldiers could see her despite her stealth technology and neural dampening. Somehow, they had tracked her to this exact location and were scanning the room with sensors that penetrated her camouflage. The Valerian technicians looked up in alarm as the armored figures spread throughout the control room. "What is the meaning of this intrusion?" the senior engineer demanded. "This is a restricted facility. Security sweep," the lead soldier replied curtly. "Continue your work." Elena remained motionless near the power coupling, her mind racing through options. Her position was exposed if these soldiers' sensors were as advanced as they appeared, but moving would only confirm their readings. She needed to understand who these people were and why they were hunting her. The lead soldier raised his arm, revealing a scanner built into his gauntlet. The device swept the room in a methodical pattern, its readings displayed on a small screen. When the beam passed over Elena's position, the screen showed a clear human silhouette despite her active camouflage. "Target acquired," he announced quietly into his helmet comm. "Ghost is confirmed present. Initiating extraction protocol." Elena's heart hammered as she realized the implications. These weren't random soldiers. They knew exactly who she was and what she was capable of. More disturbing was the fact that they were human. Project Phantom was supposed to be classified at the highest levels, known only to a handful of military officials. The scanner sweep continued, but Elena noticed something interesting about its pattern. The device could detect her presence and general position, but it wasn't precise enough to pinpoint her exact location. She was still invisible to normal observation, which meant her neural dampener was still functioning. Slowly, carefully, Elena began to move toward the maintenance shaft. Her stealth training had included techniques for avoiding even advanced sensors, methods that relied more on patience and timing than technology. She waited for each soldier to look away before advancing another few centimeters. Dimensional portal cycling to maintenance mode, one of the Valerian technicians announced. All systems nominal. Elena glanced at her chronometer. 12 minutes until the portal cycle completed. She needed to be clear of this room before the mysterious soldiers realized their quarry had slipped away, but she also couldn't abandon her mission. Too many lives depended on destroying that biological weapon. The lead soldier seemed to reach the same conclusion about his scanner's limitations. He gestured to his team, and they began moving through the control room in a coordinated search pattern. Elena found herself trapped between 2 soldiers, their paths intersecting directly beneath the maintenance shaft she needed to reach. But desperation sparked inspiration. Elena pulled out one of her electromagnetic pulse grenades, a small device designed to disable electronics without harming personnel. If she triggered it at precisely the right moment, the soldiers' sensors would be disrupted long enough for her to escape. She waited until both soldiers were directly below her position, then dropped the grenade between them. The device hit the floor and immediately released its pulse, washing over the room in an invisible wave of electromagnetic energy. The effect was immediate and chaotic. Every screen in the control room flickered and went dark. The soldiers' armor systems sparked and failed, their visors going opaque as their electronics reset. The Valerian technicians shouted in alarm as their monitoring systems crashed. Elena dropped through the maintenance shaft opening in the confusion, landing silently on the corridor floor below. Behind her, she could hear the lead soldier barking orders as his team struggled to reactivate their equipment. All teams, Ghost has breached containment, switched to backup sensors, and maintain perimeter. She's still in the facility. Elena ran through the corridor toward the reactor chamber, knowing she had only minutes before the soldiers' systems came back online. The electromagnetic pulse would buy her time, but it would also accelerate her timeline. The reactor safety systems would be cycling through their restart procedures, creating an opportunity to introduce her sabotage devices directly into the core systems. The reactor chamber was a cathedral of technology, its curved walls lined with monitoring stations and control interfaces. The fusion core itself hung in the center of the room, suspended in a magnetic field that contained energies hot enough to vaporize anything within a kilometer radius. Normally, the chamber would be heavily staffed, but the electromagnetic pulse had forced an evacuation while technicians restored the safety systems. Elena approached the primary control console and connected her tablet to the reactor's command interface. Her virus programs began infiltrating the system, mapping the reactor's control architecture and identifying the points where her devices would have maximum effect. But as the upload progressed, her enhanced hearing caught something that made her stomach drop. More footsteps in the corridors, coming from multiple directions. The mysterious soldiers had recovered faster than she had anticipated, and they were closing in on the reactor chamber. 7 minutes to portal maintenance completion, her tablet displayed. The dimensional bridge was still stable, but Elena's sabotage devices were in position to trigger a cascade failure the moment she activated them. The question was whether she could complete the mission before her pursuers cornered her. The reactor chamber had multiple exits, but Elena could hear soldiers approaching from at least 3 directions. Her stealth technology would be useless if they had more of those advanced scanners, and the chamber's open design offered little concealment. That left only one option. Elena looked up at the reactor core, suspended 20 meters above the floor. The magnetic containment field was deadly to any living organism, but it was also precisely controlled by the facility's computer systems. If she could hack into those systems and create a brief interruption in the field, the plan was insane. Even a momentary exposure to the reactor's energy output would be fatal. But Elena realized she might not need to physically reach the core. The containment field generators were housed in maintenance alcoves around the chamber's perimeter, accessible through service tunnels that connected to the ventilation system. She sprinted toward the nearest maintenance alcove as the chamber doors began to open. The mysterious soldiers entered with weapons raised, their scanners sweeping the area in coordinated patterns. Elena slipped into the service tunnel just as the first scanner beam passed through the space she had occupied. The tunnel was barely large enough for her to crawl through, but it connected to a network of service passages that honeycombed the facility. Elena made her way to the containment field generator, a massive device that hummed with barely contained electromagnetic forces. Her tablet showed 4 minutes until the portal cycle completed. Elena began connecting her remaining sabotage devices to the generator's control systems, programming them to create a brief but devastating overload in the reactor's magnetic containment. Target has entered service tunnel network, she heard one of the soldiers report over his comm system, sealing maintenance access points and deploying hunter drones. Hunter drones. Elena had encountered those before during training exercises, small, autonomous robots designed to track targets through confined spaces. Her stealth technology would be largely useless against their infrared and motion sensors. But she was almost finished. 2 more devices to place, and the reactor would be rigged to overload the moment the portal entered its maintenance cycle. The dimensional bridge would collapse, stranding the Valerian strike team in their pocket dimension along with their biological weapon. The first hunter drone appeared in the tunnel behind her, its sensors painting her position with laser targeting systems. Elena drew her sidearm and fired 2 shots, the specialized rounds disrupting the drone's electronics and sending it tumbling back down the tunnel. 3 minutes. Elena reached the final generator and began connecting her last sabotage device. The work required delicate calibration to ensure the overload would cascade through the reactor systems without triggering the facility's emergency containment procedures. More hunter drones appeared, their mechanical chittering echoing through the service tunnels. Elena's weapon had limited ammunition, and the drones seemed to be learning from their predecessor's fate, approaching more cautiously and using the tunnel's angles to avoid direct fire. 2 minutes. The final device was in place, but Elena needed to reach a safe distance before activating the sabotage sequence. The reactor overload would release massive electromagnetic pulses that could disrupt her neural implant if she was too close to the containment field. She began crawling back toward the main chamber, pursued by a growing swarm of hunter drones. Their sensors painted the tunnel walls with targeting lasers as they closed the distance between themselves and their quarry. Elena emerged from the service tunnel to find the reactor chamber filled with the mysterious soldiers. They had positioned themselves at every exit, their scanners creating overlapping fields of detection that made stealth impossible. 1 minute. The lead soldier stepped forward, his voice carrying clearly through his helmet speakers. Captain Elena Vasquez, also known as Ghost. By authority of Special Projects Command, you are ordered to surrender immediately. Elena's mind reeled. Special Projects Command was the organization that had created Project Phantom. These soldiers weren't enemy agents. They were from her own government. Your mission parameters have been updated, the soldier continued. The biological weapon is no longer the primary objective. Stand down and await extraction. 30 seconds. Elena's tablet showed the portal was entering the final phase of its maintenance cycle. In 30 seconds, her sabotage devices would trigger and the dimensional bridge would collapse. But the soldier's words had introduced a terrible new variable into her calculations. If her own government wanted the biological weapon preserved, there could be only one reason. They intended to study it, possibly to develop similar weapons for human use. The moral implications made Elena's stomach turn. 15 seconds. I repeat, stand down immediately. That is a direct order from command authority. Elena looked at her tablet's countdown timer, then at the soldiers surrounding her. Everything she had believed about her mission, about her purpose, was crumbling around her. But the countdown continued. 10 seconds. She thought about the civilian population of Kethmore, the millions of innocent beings who would die if the biological weapon was deployed. Whatever political games her superiors were playing, those lives were more important than following orders. 5 seconds. Elena activated the sabotage sequence. The reactor's hum shifted to a higher pitch as the containment field generators began overloading. Warning klaxons sounded throughout the facility as safety systems detected the cascade failure spreading through the power grid. The mysterious soldiers scattered as the chamber filled with electromagnetic interference, their advanced sensors useless in the energy storm surrounding the reactor core. Elena ran for the nearest exit as the lights flickered and the facility's power systems began collapsing in sequence. Behind her, the dimensional portal's energy signature spiked wildly before collapsing entirely. The bridge to the pocket dimension snapped closed with a thunderclap that shook the entire moon. Somewhere in an unreachable dimension, a Valerian strike team found themselves permanently stranded with their genocidal weapon. Elena reached the main corridor as the facility's emergency evacuation began. Valerian personnel streamed toward the exits as backup power struggled to maintain life support systems. In the chaos, her presence went unnoticed once again. But as she joined the evacuation, Elena knew her war had just taken a darker turn. The mysterious soldiers represented a faction within human command that was willing to use alien weapons of mass destruction. And they knew exactly who she was. The codename Ghost had protected her for 3 years, but that anonymity was gone forever. Now, she would have to fight enemies on both sides of the conflict, alien and human alike. As she reached the evacuation shuttles, Elena began planning her next move. The biological weapon was gone, but the conspiracy that had tried to preserve it was still active. She had new targets now, closer to home, and far more dangerous than any alien military force. The woman who had stepped in unnoticed was about to become very noticeable indeed. 3 months after the Quetzalcoatlus incident, Elena found herself in a place she had never expected to be, sitting across from Admiral Sarah Morrison in a secure briefing room aboard the human dreadnought Indomitable. The Admiral's weathered face showed no emotion as she reviewed the classified reports scattered across the table between them. 37 successful infiltration missions, Morrison said finally, her voice carefully neutral. 17 alien military installations neutralized. 3 genocidal campaigns prevented. And now you're wanted by both enemy intelligence services and our own Special Projects Command. Elena remained silent, her enhanced senses monitoring the room for any sign of the mysterious soldiers who had hunted her on Quetzalcoatlus. The neural dampener behind her ear was inactive. There was no point in hiding her presence when she had voluntarily surrendered herself to military custody. The reactor overload on Quetzalcoatlus stranded 14 Valerian soldiers in a collapsing pocket dimension. Morrison continued. It also destroyed a biological weapon that our Xenobiology division had been trying to acquire for 6 months. A weapon designed to commit genocide against human colonists. Elena replied steadily. I followed my original mission parameters. Admiral Morrison leaned back in her chair. Your original mission parameters were outdated. Special Projects Command had negotiated a deal with certain factions within the Valerian Empire. The biological weapon was to be transferred to human control in exchange for territorial concessions in the Outer Rim. Elena felt her stomach tighten. Territorial concessions that would have left 3 human colonies defenseless against Thurian raiders. Acceptable losses, Morrison said bluntly. The biological agent could have been reverse-engineered to create defensive countermeasures. Instead, you destroyed it and compromised a delicate diplomatic arrangement. The Admiral stood and walked to the viewport, gazing out at the stars beyond. But that's not why you're here, Captain Vasquez. You're here because in the 3 months since Quetzalcoatlus, you've become something unprecedented in human military history. A rogue operative with capabilities that make you effectively immune to conventional pursuit. Elena had spent those 3 months moving between human colonies and alien worlds, using her abilities to uncover the conspiracy that had tried to preserve the biological weapon. What she had discovered was worse than she had imagined. Special Projects Command wasn't just trying to acquire alien weapons. They were preparing for a war of extermination against every non-human species in the galaxy. The biological agents were just the beginning. They had also been developing neural parasites that could control alien minds, nanoweapons that targeted specific genetic markers, and dimensional weapons that could erase entire star systems. You've been busy, Morrison continued, turning back from the viewport. The Arcturus Research Station, the Titan shipyards, the classified facility on Europa. 17 major installations compromised in 3 months. My intelligence services can barely keep track of your movements. Elena had hit every target with surgical precision, using her invisibility to penetrate facilities that were supposedly impregnable. Each mission had revealed more pieces of the conspiracy, more evidence that a significant faction within human leadership was planning genocide on a galactic scale. The question is, Morrison said, returning to her seat, what do you intend to do with the information you've gathered? Elena reached into her jacket and placed a data pad on the table. Everything is in there. Financial records, communication intercepts, personnel files. Enough evidence to expose the entire conspiracy and bring down everyone involved. Admiral Morrison picked up the datapad and scrolled through its contents. Her expression remained neutral, but Elena noticed the slight tightening around her eyes as she read the more damaging revelations. This is comprehensive, Morrison admitted. But you realize that releasing this information would destroy human military credibility with our alien allies. The war effort would collapse within weeks. Better than letting it continue under false pretenses, Elena replied. Our allies need to know that some humans are planning to exterminate them after the current conflict ends. Morrison set down the datapad. And if I refuse to act on this information, if I order you detained, and this evidence classified, Elena smiled slightly. Then I walk out of this room, and your security teams never find me again. The evidence gets released through channels you can't control, and the conspiracy proceeds without military oversight. The Admiral studied Elena for a long moment. You're confident you can escape from a military dreadnought? I'm confident I can become invisible to your crew and leave whenever I choose. The question is whether you want to be part of the solution or part of the problem. Morrison stood and activated a secure communicator. Bridge, this is the Admiral. I need a priority conference with the Joint Chiefs, Department of Colonial Affairs, and the Senate Intelligence Committee. Full encryption, maximum classification. She turned back to Elena. It will take 6 hours to assemble everyone with the authority to act on this information. During that time, you'll remain aboard this ship as my guest. Elena nodded. And the special projects teams hunting me will be told that Ghost has been eliminated. As far as anyone outside this room knows, Captain Elena Vasquez died in the reactor overload on Quetzalcoatlus. But even as Morrison spoke, Elena's enhanced hearing caught something that made her tense. Footsteps in the corridor outside, moving with the precise rhythm she had learned to recognize. The mysterious soldiers had found her again. Morrison noticed Elena's reaction and frowned. What is it? Your ship has been compromised, Elena said quietly. The same teams that hunted me on Quetzalcoatlus are here. The Admiral's hand moved toward her sidearm. That's impossible. This meeting was classified at the highest levels. The door to the briefing room exploded inward, revealing 6 armored figures identical to those Elena had encountered 3 months earlier. Their weapons were trained on both women, and their leader's modulated voice filled the room. Admiral Morrison, by authority of Special Projects Command, you are relieved of duty. Captain Vasquez, you are under arrest for treason, sabotage, and theft of classified materials. Morrison drew her weapon, but held it lowered. I don't recognize your authority, soldier. Identify yourself and your commanding officer. Classification level above your clearance, Admiral. Stand aside. Elena studied the soldiers' positioning and equipment, noting improvements since their last encounter. Their armor showed no electromagnetic vulnerabilities, and their sensors appeared to be hardened against the pulse weapons that had disabled their predecessors. But she also noticed something else. The lead soldier's stance was slightly unbalanced, favoring his left leg. Combat injury, probably sustained during one of her recent missions. And the soldier on the far right was breathing heavily, his armor's climate control struggling to compensate for what appeared to be a respiratory condition. Human soldiers, definitely. But humans who had been augmented with technology she didn't recognize. Admiral, Elena said quietly, when I give the signal, get behind the conference table. Morrison tensed. What are you planning? To demonstrate why they call me Ghost. Elena activated her neural dampener and stealth suit simultaneously, then threw herself sideways as the room's lights suddenly failed. Emergency lighting kicked in a moment later, but in the brief darkness, Elena had vanished. The soldiers spun to track her, their sensors sweeping the room frantically. But Elena had learned new techniques during her months as a fugitive, ways to confuse even the most advanced detection systems. She moved in a pattern that exploited the gaps between their sensor sweeps, staying in the spaces where their equipment couldn't quite reach. Her sidearm appeared in her hand as she circled behind the soldier with a respiratory condition. 2 shots to his armor's life support systems sent him crashing to the floor, gasping as his suit's atmosphere recycling failed. Elena was already moving as his teammates turned toward the sound, staying ahead of their targeting systems. The lead soldier spoke into his helmet communicator. Ghost is active. Implementing Containment Protocol 7. The room's atmosphere suddenly shifted as hidden emitters released a neurotoxin designed to disable stealth technology. Elena felt her neural dampener flicker as the chemical agent began affecting her implant's neural pathways. But she had encountered similar countermeasures before. Elena held her breath and triggered her suit's emergency air supply, then dove behind the conference table as the soldiers' weapons opened fire. Energy bolts scorched the air where she had been standing, leaving smoking craters in the bulkhead behind her. Admiral Morrison crouched beside her, weapon drawn and ready. "Any brilliant ideas?" Morrison asked as another volley passed overhead. Elena checked her suit's power reserves. The stealth field was draining faster than usual, probably due to interference from the neurotoxin. She had perhaps 2 minutes before her technology failed entirely. "Yes," she said, pulling a small device from her belt. "But you're not going to like it." The device was an experimental weapon she had acquired during her infiltration of the Europa facility. A gravitational pulse generator capable of creating localized distortions in space-time. She had never tested it in combat conditions, but theoretical projections suggested it could disrupt matter at the molecular level. Elena activated the device and hurled it toward the center of the room. The soldiers scattered as the generator hit the floor and began charging, its high-pitched whine rising rapidly through the audio spectrum. "Gravitational anomaly detected," one of the soldiers shouted. "All units evacuate immediately." But Elena was already moving. She vaulted over the conference table and sprinted toward the door as the gravitational pulse reached critical charge. Behind her, Admiral Morrison followed, her military training overriding any confusion about the exotic weapon. The pulse detonated just as they reached the corridor, sending gravitational waves rippling through the ship's structure. The armored soldiers were caught in the distortion field, their enhanced reflexes useless against an attack that affected space itself. Elena and Morrison ran through the ship's corridors as emergency alarms sounded throughout the vessel. Crew members rushed to damage control stations as the gravitational pulse created localized instabilities in the ship's structural integrity. "Where are we going?" Morrison demanded as they reached a maintenance shaft. "Shuttle bay," Elena replied, pulling open the access hatch. "We need to get off this ship before those soldiers recover." They climbed through the maintenance system as the ship's artificial gravity fluctuated around them. Elena's intimate knowledge of military vessel design allowed her to navigate the maze of service passages despite the chaotic conditions. They emerged in the shuttle bay to find it in controlled chaos. Pilots and technicians were preparing emergency evacuation procedures in case the gravitational distortions compromised the ship's hull integrity. Elena appropriated a maintenance shuttle while Morrison used her command codes to override the bay's security systems. They launched just as the mysterious soldiers reached the shuttle bay, their armor showing scorch marks from the gravitational weapon. "Where to?" Morrison asked as she piloted the shuttle away from the Indomitable. Elena consulted her tablet, which displayed a star chart with several marked locations. "There's a listening post in the Vega system. Completely automated, no human crew. We can use its communication array to contact your Joint Chiefs directly." As they entered hyperspace, Elena reflected on how much had changed since she had first stepped unnoticed into enemy territory 3 years earlier. The woman who had volunteered for Project Phantom had believed she was serving humanity's interests against alien threats. Now she knew the truth was more complex. The real enemies weren't necessarily the aliens humanity was fighting, but the humans who were willing to commit genocide to achieve victory. And the only way to stop them was to ensure that her invisibility served a higher purpose than military objectives. Admiral Morrison interrupted her thoughts. "The gravitational weapon you used back there, where did you acquire it?" Elena turned from the viewport. "From a special project facility that was developing weapons specifically for use against human targets." They're not just planning to exterminate aliens, Admiral. They're preparing to eliminate anyone who opposes their vision of human supremacy. Morrison's expression darkened. Then, we have more work to do than I realized. Elena nodded. The woman who had stepped in unnoticed was about to step into the light, bringing with her evidence that would reshape humanity's relationship with the galaxy. But first, she had to ensure that the right people received that evidence before the conspiracy could silence them both. The shuttle's navigation system showed 6 hours to the Vega listening post. Elena began preparing her final transmission, the one that would reveal Ghost's true identity and purpose to the galaxy. After 3 years of operating in shadows, it was time to show everyone exactly what she had been fighting for. The war for humanity's soul was about to begin, and the woman who had been invisible for so long would finally make herself impossible to ignore. Elena Vasquez, the ghost who had haunted alien nightmares, was ready to become the guardian angel of human conscience. And this time, she wouldn't be fighting alone.